Once upon a time, a lion lived alone in the forest. He was a huge lion with paws like dinner plates and tangled mane that stretched around his head like a halo. He was a creature that liked to be alone. During the day, he would hunt around the forest for his dinner and nap under the cool canopy of the trees. One afternoon, he lay asleep, snoring heavily. A tiny mouse was scuttling along the forest floor, looking for morsels to eat. As she was so tiny, she didn't notice the enormous lion spread out under the trees. Whilst she was looking down at the floor, she ran over the lion's huge paw without even realizing it. The tickle of her tiny feet woke the lion up at once. He rose from the forest floor and roared a huge, booming roar right in the mouse's face. She was terrified, frozen to the spot. She was too afraid to move or run away. The lion placed the hook of his claw down on her tail so she couldn't escape. "Looks like I've found myself a tasty afternoon snack," he growled. "Please, Mr. Lion," said the little mouse, "don't eat me. I'll give you my word that if you let me free, I will repay you some day." She clasped her little hands in front of her and looked up at him with piteous eyes. The lion laughed. "Ha! What makes you think you could ever help me with anything, little mouse? I am much bigger and stronger than you. There is nothing you could do to help me." He was so amused by her idea that he decided to let her go. "On one condition, little mouse. If I ever see you again, I'll eat you right up." The mouse scampered back to the tree stump where she lived. Many days passed until one morning the lion was stalking around the forest, rolling around in the leaves and washing his face with his paws. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain. A huge thorn from the briars on the forest floor had become lodged in the soft pad of his paw. It had pierced so deeply that he couldn't walk on it any more. Even though he shook and shook his paw, he couldn't get it out. He roared and roared in pain all day and night. The mouse heard his cries from her tree stump, and in the morning she went to see what all the commotion was about. She found the lion lying on the floor, holding his paw in the air, weeping to himself. She smiled as she scampered up to him. With a few pulls of her tiny hands, she dislodged the thorn. The lion grinned back in delight. "Oh, little mouse, thank you. You have freed me from such pain, and I surely won't eat you now." "Now you see," said the mouse, "even the smallest creatures have a purpose." Once upon a time, there lived a poor farmer. He owned a very small plot of land where he tried to grow vegetables to feed himself and his wife. Each night, they sat at the dinner table and shared the few bits they had managed to harvest for the day. Often it was only a potato or two and some lettuce leaves. One day, the farmer was outside working on his land. All of a sudden, he heard a soft honking noise coming from the bushes next to his land. The farmer crept slowly up to the bushes and parted them. Hiding in the branches was a scraggly old goose. Her feathers were sparse and gray. She limped out of the bush, honking forlornly at the farmer. The farmer picked up the goose and took her back indoors to his wife. "See here, wife, I have found a goose on our land. Now we won't be so hungry." His wife looked at the goose. "Oh, husband, I'm not sure if I can eat this poor creature. She looks so sad and dirty." The farmer had a very kind heart, so he agreed. "Okay, wife," he said, We haven't been blessed with children, so perhaps it would be good for you to have something to care for." The farmer and his wife doted on the goose. Although it meant splitting their meager food supply even further, they were glad to have some company for the long winter months. The goose grew fat and happy from the love and care of the couple, sprouting glossy white feathers on a body that grew plump and round. One day in cold winter, the farmer's wife got up in the morning to boil some water for her husband's tea. In the early morning darkness, she tripped and stubbed her toe. "Ouch!" she cried. "That wasn't there last night." Holding up her candle, she saw a goose-sized egg lying in the middle of the kitchen floor. The egg gleamed solid gold. "Husband, husband!" she cried. "Look what the goose has laid for us." "An egg?" the farmer asked as he followed his wife into the kitchen. "Jolly good! We shall have more food for the future." He saw the lustrous egg shining in the middle of the floor. "Oh, my!" he cried. "That's made of gold." He lifted the egg from the floor to be sure, feeling its weight in his hand. The couple were delighted. They took the egg down to the market, where they exchanged it for enough food to last for many weeks. Their good deed and kindness toward the animal had been repaid. They shared their newfound fortune with the goose, feeding her the finest foods and buying her fresh straw for the box she slept in. Every day the goose rewarded them again with a beautiful golden egg, which they spent on food and fine clothes. A week passed, and the farmer and his wife were happier than ever. They had spent every egg the goose had laid, but it didn't matter. Every day she laid another. The wealth had started to poison the farmer's mind. He became angry with the goose. "Why can't you lay 2 eggs a day?" he shouted. "I could be as rich and powerful as the king." With that, he kicked the goose hard across the kitchen. She made a sad little honking noise. The goose was far too smart for the farmer. She hated being kicked. She knew it was because the gold was making him greedy and mean. That night, she waddled out of her box in the kitchen and disappeared into the night. She was off to find someone who would appreciate her, enjoy her gold, and never kick her or shout at her. The farmer and his wife didn't deserve her any more. The farmer found the empty box in the morning. Realizing the error of his ways, he wept. Now he had no eggs and no goose to lay them. "If only I had been nicer to the goose," the farmer wailed. "I was far too greedy. I have learned my lesson. Never hurt those who are good to you. Repay them only with kindness, or you may lose them forever." In just a few weeks' time, the farmer and his wife were poor all over again. Once there was a very poor miller who had a lovely daughter. The prince of their land was looking to be married, and the miller wanted the king to choose his daughter more than anything. The miller hatched a plan and sent word to the palace that his daughter was very special and worthy of the prince. "She can spin straw into gold," he lied. His daughter was upset that he had told such an untruth on her behalf, but thought no one would believe such a silly story. She was wrong. His lie caught the interest of the king, so he sent for the miller's daughter to be brought to the palace. When evening came, he locked her in a room filled with straw. The brown and yellow piles were stacked from the floor right up to the ceiling, and in the middle of it all stood a spinning wheel. "Spin the straw into gold by morning," he said, "and I'll consider you as a good wife for my son." The poor girl was very frightened. Surely, if she couldn't make the gold, then she and her father would be punished. She cried as she passed the straw through her hands. At midnight, a strange little figure popped up at the palace window. He had a pointy green hat on and a brown velvet suit. His shoes were curly at the toes, and he stood at barely 3 feet high. "Why are you so sad, little girl?" the creature asked. "I'm supposed to spin all this straw into gold," she said sadly. "But it's impossible." The little man smiled mischievously. "I can help you," he said. "I'm the best spinner in all the land. But if I'm to do this for you, I want something in return. If I spin all this straw into precious gold, you must give me something precious, your first-born child," the little man said triumphantly. The miller's daughter wasn't sure about that at all, but she was desperate to please the king and her father, so she agreed. Whooping with delight, the little man sat down at the spinning wheel and started to work. Tiny sparks flew from his nifty fingers. Straw went into the wheel, and sure enough, gold came out. By morning, the room was heaped with glittering gold strands. The little man popped back out of the window and into the dawn. When the king unlocked the door and saw the gold, he was very pleased. "Well then," he said, "looks as though I found a good and proper wife for my son." The miller's daughter was ecstatic, and her father wept with joy when he heard the news. The miller's daughter was married the very next month to the noble prince, and together they became the new king and queen. A year or two passed. The new queen had totally forgotten her promise to the little man with the green hat. It wasn't until after she gave birth to her first child that he appeared at the window of the palace once more. "I've come to claim what is rightfully mine," he sang out of the darkness. The queen was horrified. She knew she had to keep her word, or the king and his father would find out that she had lied about the straw. She tried to offer the little man all her money and jewels instead, but he couldn't accept it. "That isn't what I was promised," he cried. "Queen, I know the lie about spinning gold wasn't your idea. I will give you a chance to keep your baby if you play a game with me." The queen agreed at once. She would do anything to keep her child. "The game is simple. I will return to you every night for the next 3 days. Each night you shall try to guess my name. If you don't get it right by the time the sun comes up on the 3rd day, the child is mine." The queen spent the whole of the next day making a long list of all the names she had ever heard. That night she read all them to the little man, but none were right. His name wasn't James or John, not Matthew or Peter, not any of the names she knew. In preparation for the second night, the queen sent her soldiers all over the kingdom to search for new names. Alas, on the second night, she still couldn't guess correctly. By the 3rd day, the queen had lost hope. She sent her soldiers out again to search for names. they found nothing new apart from the last soldier. He returned with a very strange story. "I was just passing through the forest when I saw a funny little man in a brown suit dancing around a big fire," he told the queen. "He was singing, 'Ha, ha, ha, the queen shall never win, for she'll never guess my name is Rumpelstiltskin.'" The queen and her soldiers cheered with delight. That night, when the little man arrived, the queen pretended for a little while. "Is your name Anansi?" "No," he answered. "Then is it Kitsune or Tokoloshi?" "It isn't," he said. "Could it be Rumpelstiltskin?" she finally asked, smiling. The little man turned bright red and stamped his foot. "Be careful what you say, Rumpelstiltskin," said the wise queen. "You never know who might be listening." Screaming, he jumped out of the window and was never seen in the kingdom again. Once upon a time, there was a young boy called Jack. He and his mother lived in a tiny cottage in a tiny village. His mother was a very poor widow who took in washing to make money, but she never made very much. Jack did everything he could do to help her. They had an old cow that gave milk, so Jack would milk her every day and walk to the market to sell the milk. One day, Jack's mother told him that they couldn't afford to keep feeding the cow, and they would have to sell her. They were desperate for money, and she was worth more than the milk she gave. Jack was very sad, but knew he had to do it. So he set off for the market, trailing the cow behind him. On the way, he met a strange little man. He was dressed all in green and was wearing a pointy hat. "Hello, Jack," the little man said. "I'd like to buy your cow." "How do you know my name?" asked Jack, astonished. "I've been waiting for you here, Jack. I know exactly what you need in return for her. These magic beans. Take them home and show them to your mother, and she will know just what to do with them." He produced a small packet of round brown beans from his pocket. "Take these beans, and all your dreams will come true." Jack was convinced that the man was telling the truth about the beans. How else would he have already known Jack's name, or that he would be selling the cow? He handed over the cow in exchange for the beans at once and skipped home. His mother was furious. "You sold the cow for beans? They're so tiny, we can't even eat them. How could you do such a reckless thing?" She snatched the beans from Jack's hand and threw them out of the window in anger. Jack was very sad. He must have been wrong about the little man, as his mother didn't know what to do with beans at all. Jack went to bed without any dinner to think about his bad decision. The next day, he woke up to a huge shadow across his room. He opened his curtains, and outside the window, where his mother had thrown the beans, an enormous beanstalk had grown. It was as thick as 4 men and rose high into the clouds, leafy and green. Jack knew he had to explore what was at the top. The little man had promised that all his dreams would come true. He packed a bag with an axe to protect himself and some food for the journey, and began to climb up the beanstalk. He climbed and climbed for most of the day, until he had got right over the top of the clouds. Sitting on top of the clouds was a huge house. It was as tall as 5 normal houses and just as wide. Jack crept inside and hid inside a mouse hole in the skirting board. Soon enough, he heard big thumping footsteps coming into the house. He held his breath. It was a giant. The giant was hundreds of feet tall, with hairy hands and big feet. The giant shouted in his booming voice, "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." He searched around the house, looking in the cupboards and under the table, but he didn't find Jack. Soon he gave up the search and took out a huge sack of gold coins. After counting all the gold coins in his sack, the giant fell asleep in his huge bed. Jack waited a while until it was dark and crept out of his hiding place. He tiptoed over to the sack and took out a gold coin. It was the size of a dinner plate. He packed as many as he could carry into his bag, then ran from the house and climbed carefully back down the beanstalk. His mother was overjoyed to see him safely home, and even more pleased when she saw what he had brought. Jack bravely vowed to go back to the giant's house the next day to see what else he could grab. The next day he packed a bag and climbed up the beanstalk again, sneaking back into his hiding place in the giant's house. He waited until the giant returned for the evening. "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread," shouted the giant again. He still couldn't find Jack anywhere. This time the giant went outside and brought a chicken into his house. "Lay!" he commanded, and out from the chicken popped a golden egg. When the giant fell asleep, Jack took the chicken and climbed down the beanstalk again. Now Jack and his mother had gold coins and a chicken that laid golden eggs. Still, Jack thought there might be more in the giant's house, so he climbed up the beanstalk for the 3rd time. As he hid, he heard the giant's familiar words, "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread," he bellowed. This time, when he couldn't find anyone in his house, he took out a beautiful harp. "Play!" he shouted, and the harp began to play lovely music all by itself. Jack waited again until the giant was asleep, grabbed the harp, and ran for the door. "Help! Help!" screamed the harp. "Someone is stealing me!" The giant woke up and saw Jack running for the door. "It's you who has been stealing from me," he roared. "I'll squash you like a bug." Jack ran as fast as he could to the top of the beanstalk and shimmied down it. He grabbed the axe from out of his bag and began to hack at the stalk. After a few big, hard chops, the beanstalk began to wobble and fell to the ground. The giant was trapped up in the clouds with no way down. Jack went home and hugged his mother. He took the harp from his bag and said, "I know I have stolen you, but now you live with us, and you don't have to play if you don't want to. We will never shout at you like the giant did." Then he turned to the chicken and said, "The same goes for you. You can lay when you want to lay, or not at all. We're just happy to have you here to live with us." The chicken clucked happily, and the harp played a tinkly little tune. They had never known kindness from the giant, and were very pleased to have Jack as a master now. Jack and his mother lived happily ever after on the fortune of the golden coins. There once was a mother duck who was sitting on a clutch of eggs. She waited patiently day and night for her babies to hatch. One morning, the mother duck woke to a strange sound. Crack, crack! One by one, her eggs were hatching. Soon she had 7 little ducklings in her nest, and was only waiting for one more to hatch. This egg was larger and browner than the rest. After many hours of waiting, the brown egg began to move. All of the little ducks watched as a large, strange-looking head popped out of the egg. The 8th baby didn't look much like a duck. His beak was too long, his feathers were too dark, and his face was too ugly. His brothers and sisters laughed at him. "Ugly duck, they chanted. The ugly duck felt very lonely already. The mother duck led her children into the nearby pond and began to teach each duckling how to quack. The 7 ducklings copied her perfectly. Quack, quack. The 8th duckling wanted to join in. Quack! He tried. The other ducklings laughed at the silly sound he made. All of the ducks in the pond stared at the ugly duckling and began to laugh. The ugly duckling was embarrassed, so every day he hid in the corner of the pond while the others practiced diving and splashing. One evening, as all of the ducks in the pond had gone to sleep, the ugly duckling decided that it was time for him to leave. He didn't fit in with any of the other ducks and wanted to find other birds that might accept him. He waddled far away from the pond where he was born. He waddled through small marsh plants and tall river reeds. He waddled over logs and through heaps of mud, which made him dirtier than ever. Soon he came upon a family of geese in a new pond, far away from his nest. They had darker feathers, just like he did. "Hello," said the ugly duckling. "I look a bit like you. Can I stay here?" The father goose honked and laughed. "You are certainly uglier than us, but there is some room in our pond. Though you are quite strange looking, you may stay with us." The ugly duckling couldn't be happier. The geese were kind to him, though their honks were very loud. The duckling stayed with the geese for a few months. He was growing larger. His longer feathers were coming in, and he was getting fatter. Soon there wasn't enough room for him in the geese's pond anymore. "You're getting very big," said the father goose. "You'll have to find somewhere else to stay for the winter." The ugly duckling hung his head and waddled far from the pond. He spent the cold winter alone, hiding in trees and bushes. In the spring, he waddled around looking for another new place to live. He saw a family of beautiful birds with long white feathers and elegant necks. As he walked past the water, he didn't even dare to ask these birds if he could come into their pond. He knew he was too ugly to swim alongside them. One of the swans floated past the duckling. "Your feathers are the whitest I've ever seen. How they gleam in the sun," he called to the duckling. Confused, the ugly duckling wandered to the water and peered at his reflection. He wasn't a duck at all. He had grown into a beautiful white swan with a long and elegant neck. How silly his brothers and sisters had been to make fun of him. Inside he had always been a beautiful swan. He told his stories to the other swans, and they shook their heads sadly. It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. You have always been a kind and sweet duckling, and you tried hard to fit in wherever you went. We wouldn't care, even if you were still ugly. It's only what's on the inside that counts. Would you like to stay in our pond? It's open to everyone." He slid into the water, hooting happily. He had found his home.